The iron shackles bit into Penelope Jensen's wrists as the judge's gavel fell, sealing her fate with a sound that would echo in her nightmares for months to come. "Guilty of the murder of Samuel Pritchard," the judge announced in a voice devoid of mercy, his weathered face stone-cold beneath white bushy eyebrows. "You will be hanged by the neck until dead, 1 month from this day. May God have mercy on your soul." The courtroom in Abilene, Kansas erupted in a mixture of gasps and satisfied murmurs. Penelope stood frozen at the defendant's table, her legs threatening to give way beneath her simple cotton dress. The date was June 3rd, 1883, and her life as she knew it had just ended. She had not pulled the trigger that killed Samuel Pritchard, the wealthy banker who had been found dead in his office 3 weeks prior, but the evidence painted a damning picture that she could not explain away. The gun had been found in her small, rented room above the general store where she worked. Her handkerchief, embroidered with her initials, had been discovered clutched in the dead man's hand. Worst of all, several townspeople had testified to seeing her enter the bank that evening, though she had no memory of such a visit. The prosecutor had painted her as a scorned woman, furious that Pritchard had rejected her advances, though nothing could be further from the truth. She had barely spoken 2 words to the man in her entire life. "Please," Penelope whispered, her voice breaking. "I did not do this. I swear on my mother's grave I am innocent," but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The bailiff, a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth, grabbed her arm roughly and began dragging her toward the back exit that led to the jail. The crowd parted, some faces showing pity, others displaying righteous satisfaction at seeing justice served. Among them, Penelope caught sight of Victoria Pritchard, Samuel's widow, her face hidden partially behind a black veil. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Penelope could have sworn she saw something flicker across the woman's features, something that looked almost like guilt before it vanished. The jail cell was small, damp, and smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. Penelope collapsed onto the thin mattress that served as a bed, finally allowing the tears she had held back during the trial to flow freely. She was 22 years old, alone in the world since her parents had died of fever 2 years prior, and now she would die for a crime she did not commit. The injustice of it all threatened to crush her spirit completely. That evening, as the sun set over the Kansas plains and cast long shadows through the barred window of her cell, Penelope heard the main door to the jail open. Sheriff Thomas called out a greeting, and a deep, unfamiliar voice responded. Footsteps approached her cell, and Penelope looked up to find a tall cowboy standing on the other side of the bars, his hat in his hands. He was perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with strong features that might have been carved from the very stone of the Kansas earth. He wore the typical attire of a ranch hand, dusty boots, worn denim, and a leather vest over a chambray shirt. But it was his expression that caught Penelope's attention. There was no judgment there, no condemnation, only a deep, searching curiosity. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My name is Nathan Sanders. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch about 10 miles outside of town." Penelope wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself despite her disheveled state. "What do you want? Have you come to gawk at the murderess before they string her up?" Nathan flinched at her bitter tone but did not retreat. "No, madam. I came because I do not believe you are guilty." Those words, so simple yet so profound, struck Penelope like a physical blow. She stood quickly, moving to the bars that separated them. "What did you say?" "I said I do not believe you killed Samuel Pritchard," Nathan repeated, his gray eyes holding her steadily. "I was in town the night he died. I saw you that evening, walking along Main Street with a basket of mending from Mrs. Henderson's house. You were heading back to your room above the store. That was around 7 o'clock, according to the church bell. The banker was killed at 8, according to the coroner's report. The way I figure it, you would not have had time to commit the crime they say you did." Penelope's heart began to hammer in her chest. "You saw me. Did you tell the sheriff? Did you testify at my trial?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "I tried. I went to the sheriff the day after Pritchard's body was found. He said my testimony was not needed, that they had their killer already. When I insisted, he told me I must have been mistaken about the time or the person I saw. I was not called to testify during your trial, though I sent word to your lawyer." "I had no real lawyer," Penelope said bitterly. "Just a young man fresh from law school who seemed more interested in finishing quickly than in mounting a defense. He told me to plead guilty and beg for mercy, said it would go easier on me. I refused." Nathan nodded slowly, processing this information. "Then we have 1 month to prove your innocence. I intend to spend every moment of that time finding the truth." "Why?" Penelope asked, the question bursting from her lips. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. We have never even met before this moment." Nathan was silent for a long moment, and Penelope watched emotions flicker across his face like clouds racing across the sky. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I know what it is to be falsely accused, to have everyone turn against you based on lies. When I was 18, back in Missouri, my own father accused me of stealing money from our family store. He had been drinking heavily after my mother's death and had spent the money himself, but in his grief and shame, he blamed me. The whole town believed him. I had to leave, start over here in Kansas with nothing but the clothes on my back and a horse I had raised from a foal." He met her eyes again, and Penelope saw pain there, old but not forgotten. "I eventually proved my innocence through letters and records, but by then, my father had died, and I never got to hear him say he was sorry, that he believed me. I will not let the same thing happen to you if there is anything in my power to prevent it." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different from the hopeless tears she had shed earlier. These tears contained a tiny spark of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me when no one else does." Nathan reached through the bars, and after a moment's hesitation, Penelope placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. He squeezed gently, and she felt that simple gesture all the way to her core. "I will return tomorrow," he promised. "In the meantime, try to think of anything, any detail no matter how small, that might help us determine who really killed Samuel Pritchard." After Nathan left, Penelope lay on her cot and forced herself to think clearly for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She had been so overwhelmed by fear and shock that she had not truly examined the events leading up to her arrest. Now, with Nathan's belief in her innocence giving her strength, she began to piece together the fragments of that terrible evening. She had indeed been returning from Mrs. Henderson's house with a basket of mending, just as Nathan had said. She remembered the church bell ringing as she walked, 7 deep, resonant tones. She had climbed the outside stairs to her small room, lit her lamp, and set about preparing a simple supper of bread and cheese. She had been exhausted from a long day of work at the general store and had gone to bed early, probably around 9 o'clock. The next thing she knew, Sheriff Thomas was pounding on her door before dawn, demanding entry. He had torn through her meager possessions until he found the gun wrapped in cloth beneath her bed. Penelope had never seen it before in her life. She did not even know how to fire a gun. When she protested her innocence, the sheriff had simply shaken his head and placed her under arrest. But how had the gun gotten there? And her handkerchief, the one supposedly found in the dead man's hand? Penelope had several handkerchiefs, all embroidered by her mother years ago. She kept them in a small wooden box on her dresser. She tried to remember if any had been missing, but in her panic, she could not recall. The next morning, Nathan returned as promised, this time accompanied by a woman Penelope recognized as Clara Morrison, the owner of the boarding house on the edge of town. Clara was a stout woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a reputation for being fair-minded. "Miss Jensen," Clara said, her voice gentle, "Nathan has told me about your situation and I want to help. I have known you since you first came to Abilene, and I do not believe for one moment that you are capable of murder." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison," Penelope said, fresh tears threatening. "But I do not know what anyone can do. The trial is over. I have been convicted." "There are always avenues for appeal," Nathan said, though his tone suggested he did not have much faith in that process. "But more importantly, we can investigate on our own. If we can find evidence of your innocence, or better yet, evidence pointing to the real killer, we can take it to the territorial governor." For the next hour, the three of them talked, going over every detail Penelope could remember. Clara took notes in a small journal, her face growing increasingly troubled as the picture emerged. "It seems to me," Clara said finally, "that someone went to great lengths to frame you, Miss Jensen. The gun planted in your room, your handkerchief somehow ending up with the body, these are not coincidences. Someone wanted you to take the blame for this murder." "But why?" Penelope asked desperately. "I am nobody, I have nothing. Why would anyone go to such trouble to destroy me?" Nathan had been standing quietly, his arms crossed, his face thoughtful. Now he spoke up. "Maybe it is not about you at all. Maybe you were simply convenient, someone without family or powerful friends to defend you, someone who would not be missed. The real question is, who wanted Samuel Pritchard dead, and who had the means and opportunity to kill him?" Over the following days, Nathan became a constant presence in Penelope's life. He came to the jail each morning and evening, bringing her decent food to supplement the meager prison fare, and more importantly, bringing news of his investigation. Despite having to maintain his duties at the Triple Creek Ranch, he devoted every spare moment to uncovering the truth. He interviewed people who had known Samuel Pritchard, painting a picture of a man who was not quite as upright as his public image suggested. The banker had been involved in several shady land deals, foreclosing on properties, and then selling them at a profit to investors from back east. More than a few families in the county had reason to resent him. "I spoke with Daniel Cooper," Nathan reported one evening about a week after Penelope's conviction. "He lost his farm to Pritchard last year. He has been bitter about it, drinking heavily. He said some threatening things about the banker in the weeks before the murder." "Do you think he could be the killer?" Penelope asked, though she found it hard to feel hopeful. Daniel Cooper had 3 young children and a wife who was expecting another. She did not want to see another family destroyed, even if it might save her own life. Nathan shook his head. "He was in Salina the night of the murder, visiting his brother. I checked with the hotel there and they confirmed he stayed 2 nights. His alibi is solid." Penelope's shoulders sagged. Nathan reached through the bars and took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the past week. She found herself looking forward to these moments of contact more than she wanted to admit. Even in her dire circumstances, or perhaps because of them, she was becoming acutely aware of Nathan Sanders as a man, not just as her savior. He was unfailingly kind, But more than that, he was intelligent and determined. He treated her with respect, never once suggesting that she should have done anything differently or that she bore any responsibility for her situation. In his presence, she felt seen and valued in a way she had not experienced since her parents' death. "We will find the truth," Nathan said softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I promise you, Penelope, I will not let you hang for a crime you did not commit." The use of her first name sent a flutter through Penelope's chest. "You have done so much already, Nathan. More than anyone else would have. I do not know how I can ever repay you." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker in their depths, something warm and powerful that made her breath catch. "I do not want repayment. I just want you to be free." As the days passed, and June gave way to July, Nathan continued his investigation with single-minded determination. He discovered that Samuel Pritchard had been involved in a dispute with his business partner, Edward Garrett, over the proceeds from a land sale. He learned that Pritchard had been courting a young woman from a respectable family, even though his wife was still very much alive and living in their fine house on the hill. But most intriguingly, he discovered that Victoria Pritchard, the grieving widow, had been spending time with a man named Lawrence Carter, the owner of a successful cattle operation. According to gossip, their friendship had begun long before Samuel Pritchard's death. "I need to speak with Mrs. Pritchard," Nathan told Penelope during one of his visits. "But she refuses to see me. She has made it clear that she considers the matter closed and does not appreciate my interference." "She looked at me strangely during the trial," Penelope said, remembering that brief moment. "I thought at the time that she seemed almost guilty, but that makes no sense. Why would a wife kill her husband and then frame someone else for the crime?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Money, perhaps, or freedom. From what I have learned, Samuel Pritchard was not an easy man to live with. He was controlling and often cruel. And if Victoria wanted to be with Lawrence Carter, divorce would have been scandalous and would have left her with nothing. But as a widow, she inherits everything." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but they still did not have proof, nothing concrete that would convince the authorities to reopen the case. Time was running out. Penelope could feel it like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She had less than 2 weeks left before her execution date. It was Clara Morrison who provided the breakthrough. She came to the jail one morning, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. Nathan was already there, and the three of them huddled close to the bars as Clara spoke in a rapid whisper. "I was visiting my cousin in Salina yesterday, and I happened to mention your situation, Miss Jensen. My cousin, her daughter works as a maid in the hotel there. She remembered seeing Victoria Pritchard at the hotel the week before Samuel Pritchard's murder. She was meeting with a man, not Lawrence Carter, but a stranger from out of town. They were arguing about money, about how much it would cost." Nathan's whole body tensed. "Did this maid hear anything specific?" She heard Victoria say that she needed it done quickly and quietly, that her husband could not suspect anything. "The man said it would cost $500, and that he would need something that belonged to whoever they wanted to blame." Penelope felt her heart leap into her throat. "My handkerchief. Someone stole my handkerchief from my room." "The door to your room, did it lock?" Nathan asked urgently. "Yes, but the lock was old and simple. Anyone with a bit of skill could have picked it, and I was often at work all day. Someone could have entered and taken my handkerchief without my knowledge." Nathan began pacing, his mind clearly working through the implications. "So Victoria Pritchard hired someone to kill her husband and frame you for it. She provided your handkerchief to the killer. But how did the gun end up in your room? The killer would have needed access to plant it there." "Unless Victoria planted it herself," Clara suggested. Or had someone else do it? She is a wealthy, well-connected woman. She could have hired multiple people for different parts of the job. We need proof, Nathan said. This is all speculation and second-hand information. We need something concrete that will force the sheriff to reopen the investigation. That evening, Nathan did something risky. He waited until after dark, then made his way to the Pritchard mansion on the hill. The house was grand by Abilene standards, a two-story structure with a wide porch and manicured gardens. Lights glowed in several windows, and Nathan could see shadows moving inside. He knew he was taking a terrible chance. If he was caught trespassing, his credibility would be destroyed, and any evidence he found might be dismissed. But he was running out of time, and he could not bear the thought of Penelope Jensen dying for a crime she did not commit. Somewhere over the past weeks, his determination to save her had transformed into something deeper, something he was not quite ready to name but could no longer deny. He had fallen in love with her. It had happened gradually, through long conversations at the jailhouse, through seeing her courage in the face of injustice, through the way her face lit up when he arrived each day despite the desperate nature of her circumstances. She was brave and kind and utterly innocent, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. Nathan circled the house, staying in the shadows of the trees that lined the property. He peered through windows, trying to get a sense of the layout and where Victoria might keep important documents or correspondence. In what appeared to be a study, he saw Victoria herself, seated at a desk, writing something by lamplight. She appeared to be alone. He moved to another window and found what looked like a bedroom, probably the master bedroom that Victoria had shared with her late husband. Acting on instinct, Nathan tried the window and found it unlocked. Taking a deep breath, he carefully pushed it open and climbed inside. The room was elegant, with heavy furniture and thick carpets that muffled his footsteps. Nathan moved quickly to a writing desk in the corner and began searching through the drawers. He found household accounts, social correspondence, and various documents related to Samuel Pritchard's business affairs. Nothing that would prove Victoria's guilt. He was about to give up when he noticed a small locked box in the bottom drawer. Using his pocketknife, he carefully pried it open. Inside, he found a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. His hands shaking slightly, he unfolded one and began to read by the moonlight streaming through the window. The letters were from Lawrence Carter, and they left no doubt about the nature of his relationship with Victoria. But more importantly, there was a letter from someone who signed himself only as J.M. The letter discussed payment for services rendered and mentioned that the matter had been handled as requested. The date on the letter was the day after Samuel Pritchard's murder. Nathan's heart raced. This was the evidence they needed. He quickly folded the letter and tucked it into his vest. He was about to climb back out the window when he heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. Panic seized him. If Victoria came in and found him, everything would be lost. He barely managed to slip behind the heavy curtains before the door opened and lamplight flooded the room. Through a gap in the fabric, Nathan watched as Victoria entered, followed by a man he recognized as Lawrence Carter. "We need to be more careful," Victoria was saying, her voice tight with anxiety. "That cowboy, Nathan Sanders, he has been asking questions all over town. He is not going to let this go." "What can he possibly find?" Lawrence replied, though he sounded less confident than his words suggested. "The girl was convicted. She will hang in less than 2 weeks and then it will all be over." "But what if he finds something? What if someone talks?" Victoria moved to the window and Nathan held his breath, pressing himself as flat as possible against the wall. "I paid that man to leave town immediately after he planted the gun, but what if he comes back? What if he tries to blackmail us?" Then we will deal with him the same way we dealt with Samuel, Lawrence said coldly. You worry too much, Victoria. Everything is going according to plan. Victoria turned from the window, and Nathan could see her face clearly now. She looked haggard, older than her years, with dark circles under her eyes. I sometimes wake in the night and think I hear Samuel's voice, accusing me. Perhaps we should have found another way. There was no other way, Lawrence said, moving to embrace her. Your husband would never have divorced you, and he controlled all the money. This was the only solution. And once that girl hangs, no one will question what happened. Justice will have been served, and we can be together openly. They left the room shortly after, and Nathan waited several long minutes before emerging from his hiding place. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He had heard Victoria all but confess to orchestrating her husband's murder and framing Penelope. Combined with the letter, he now had enough evidence to reopen the case. He climbed out the window and made his way back to town as quickly as possible. But instead of going to the sheriff, whom he did not trust, he went to see Judge Harrison, the circuit judge who had presided over Penelope's trial. Harrison had a reputation for being stern but fair, and Nathan hoped that, confronted with new evidence, he would be willing to reconsider the verdict. Judge Harrison lived in a modest house near the courthouse. Despite the late hour, Nathan pounded on the door until a light appeared and the judge answered, dressed in a nightshirt and looking thoroughly disgruntled. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "You know what time it is." "Your Honor, I apologize for the intrusion, but I have evidence that Penelope Jensen is innocent of the murder of Samuel Pritchard," Nathan said rapidly. "I have a letter that proves Victoria Pritchard hired someone to kill her husband, and I overheard her confessing to the crime tonight." Judge Harrison's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise to deep interest. "You had better come inside and explain yourself, young man." For the next hour, Nathan laid out everything he had discovered. He showed the judge the letter from J.M. and recounted the conversation he had overheard between Victoria and Lawrence Carter. Judge Harrison listened carefully, asking pointed questions and examining the evidence with a critical eye. "This is serious," the judge said finally. "If what you are saying is true, we have convicted an innocent woman while the real killers walk free. However, I cannot simply overturn a jury verdict based on a stolen letter and hearsay. We need more." "What more do you need?" Nathan asked desperately. "Penelope Jensen is going to die in less than 2 weeks for something she did not do." Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and began pacing his small parlor. "We need to identify this J.M. and get him to testify. We need to find concrete proof that Victoria Pritchard paid him to commit murder. And we need to do it quickly. I can grant a stay of execution based on new evidence, which will buy us some time, but not much. The territorial governor will not appreciate me second-guessing a jury without solid grounds." "How do we find this J.M.?" Nathan asked. "The postmark on the letter, what does it say?" Nathan examined the envelope more closely. "Dodge City." "Then, that is where you need to go," Judge Harrison said. "Take this letter to the sheriff in Dodge City and see if he can help you identify the writer. Meanwhile, I will issue a stay of execution and begin the process of requesting a new investigation. But you must move quickly, Mr. Sanders. I can only hold off the inevitable for so long." Nathan left Judge Harrison's house as the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. He went immediately to the jail, where he found Sheriff Thomas just arriving to begin his day. The sheriff was not happy to see him. "You again," Thomas grumbled. "I thought I made it clear that this case is closed. Judge Harrison is issuing a stay of execution for Penelope Jensen," Nathan said, taking satisfaction in the way the sheriff's face paled. There is new evidence that suggests she is innocent. The judge wants the case reopened. Sheriff Thomas's expression darkened. Now you listen here, Sanders. That woman is guilty as sin. The jury said so, and I do not appreciate you stirring up trouble. With respect, Sheriff, the only trouble is that you arrested the wrong person, Nathan said firmly. And if you do not cooperate with the judge's investigation, it is going to look like you were either incompetent or complicit in framing an innocent woman. The sheriff bristled, but before he could respond, Judge Harrison himself arrived, official documents in hand. Sheriff Thomas, I am ordering you to cooperate fully with Mr. Sanders's investigation. He is acting as an agent of this court. Is that understood? Faced with a direct order from a judge, the sheriff had no choice but to agree, though his resentment was obvious. Nathan did not care about the sheriff's feelings. All that mattered was clearing Penelope's name. When Nathan finally got to see Penelope that morning, she was sitting on her cot with her face in her hands. She looked up as he approached, and the hope in her eyes when she saw him nearly broke his heart. "Nathan," she breathed. The sheriff said something about a stay of execution, but I did not dare believe it. "It is true," Nathan said, reaching through the bars to take both her hands in his. "Judge Harrison has agreed to postpone your execution while we investigate further. I found evidence, Penelope. Evidence that Victoria Pritchard hired someone to kill her husband and frame you for the crime." Penelope's legs seemed to give out, and she sank back onto the cot, tears streaming down her face. Thank God, and thank you, Nathan. I do not know what I did to deserve your faith in me, but I will be grateful for it until my dying day." Nathan knelt down so they were at eye level through the bars. "I need to leave Abilene for a few days. I have to go to Dodge City to try to find the man Victoria hired. But I will be back as soon as I can. Clara Morrison is going to visit you every day while I am gone. You will not be alone." Penelope squeezed his hands tightly. "Please be careful. If Victoria realizes what you are doing, she might try to stop you. She has already killed once." "I will be careful," Nathan promised. "And when I get back, when we prove your innocence and you are free, I want to talk to you about something important." "What is it?" Penelope asked, her voice soft. Nathan hesitated, then decided this moment was too important for half measures. "I've come to care for you deeply, Penelope. More than I ever expected to care for anyone. When this is over, when you are free, I want the chance to court you properly, if you would be willing." Penelope's eyes widened and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different tears, tears of joy mixed with disbelief. "You care for me? Even after everything, after I have been convicted of murder and locked in this cell, I care for you because of who you are," Nathan said simply. "Your courage, your strength, your goodness. None of that has anything to do with this cell or the injustice that put you here. So when this is over, and it will be over, I would be honored if you would let me call on you." "Yes," Penelope whispered. "Yes, Nathan, I would like that very much. You have given me hope when I had none, believed in me when everyone else had condemned me. I think I have been falling in love with you since the first day you walked into this jail." Nathan felt his heart expand in his chest. Despite everything, despite the dire circumstances and the battle still ahead, he felt joy surge through him. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against the bars, and Penelope did the same, their faces inches apart. "When you are free," he said quietly, "I am going to kiss you properly." "I will hold you to that promise," Penelope replied, her voice trembling but determined. Nathan left for Dodge City that afternoon, riding his sturdy bay gelding at a steady pace. The distance was about 150 miles, which would take him at least 3 days of hard riding. Every moment away from Abilene felt like an eternity, but he knew this trip was necessary. Dodge City was a rough, bustling town, much larger and more lawless than Abilene. Cattle drives came through regularly, and the streets were filled with cowboys, gamblers, and all manner of people seeking their fortune on the frontier. Nathan made his way to the sheriff's office, a sturdy building near the center of town. The sheriff of Dodge City was a man named Matthew Sykes, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes and a reputation for being honest, if hard-edged. Nathan explained his mission, showing Sykes the letter signed by J.M., and explaining the situation in Abilene. "So you think this J.M. character is from Dodge City?" Sykes asked, examining the letter carefully. "The postmark suggests it," Nathan replied, "and I am hoping you might be able to help me identify him. He is someone who would be willing to commit murder for money, someone who could travel to Abilene without attracting notice." Sykes was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "There is a man who goes by the name of Jake Morrison. He is a hired gun, does dirty work for anyone willing to pay. He has been in and out of Dodge City for the past year or so. Last I heard, he was staying at the Lady Luck Saloon renting a room upstairs." "Can you take me to him?" Nathan asked. "I can do better than that," Sykes replied. "I can arrest him for questioning. If he is involved in murder, even if it happened in another jurisdiction, I have grounds to hold him." Within the hour, Sheriff Sykes and 2 deputies had arrested Jake Morrison without incident. The man was about 40 years old, lean and hard-looking, with cold eyes and a mouth that seemed unused to smiling. He was brought to the sheriff's office and placed in a holding cell. "I have not done anything wrong," Morrison protested. "You cannot hold me without charges." "We have questions about a murder in Abilene," Sykes said flatly. "You can answer them here, or I can turn you over to the authorities there. Your choice." Morrison's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough to confirm Nathan's suspicions. This man knew something about Samuel Pritchard's death. Nathan stepped forward, holding up the letter. "Did you write this, Mr. Morrison? Did Victoria Pritchard hire you to kill her husband and frame an innocent woman for the crime?" "I do not know what you are talking about," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sheriff Sykes leaned against the cell bars, his expression hard. "Here is how I see it, Morrison. You are in a tight spot. We have evidence linking you to a murder. Now, the woman who hired you, she is sitting pretty in Abilene, wealthy and free, while an innocent girl sits in jail waiting to hang. Does that seem fair to you? Because it seems to me like you are taking all the risk while she gets all the reward." Nathan could see Morrison thinking, weighing his options. Finally, the man seemed to make a decision. "If I tell you what I know, what happens to me?" "That depends on what you tell us and how cooperative you are," Sykes said. "But I can tell you this, if you stay quiet and that innocent woman hangs, you will be guilty of murder. If you talk and help us catch the person who ordered the killing, well, that shows remorse and cooperation. A judge might look favorably on that." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound of a man who had finally given up fighting. "Victoria Pritchard contacted me through an intermediary about 2 months ago. She wanted her husband dead but made to look like someone else did it. She paid me $200 upfront and promised another $300 after the job was done." "Did you kill Samuel Pritchard?" Nathan asked, his voice hard. "No," Morrison said. "I was paid to set up the frame, not to pull the trigger. Victoria wanted to be sure she had an alibi, so she did the actual killing herself. I just planted the evidence afterward. The gun in the girl's room and the handkerchief I got from Victoria at the scene of the crime. Victoria told me the girl was nobody, someone who would not be missed, and that she deserved it anyway for some reason." Nathan felt rage boil up inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Are you willing to testify to all this in court?" Morrison nodded slowly. "If it means saving my own neck, yeah, I will testify. But you better protect me, because if Victoria finds out I talked, she will send someone else to silence me permanently." Sheriff Sykes agreed to hold Morrison in protective custody until arrangements could be made to transport him to Abilene for trial. Nathan, his mission accomplished but his heart still heavy with the knowledge of how close Penelope had come to dying for another person's crime, prepared for the journey home. He arrived back in Abilene 5 days after he had left, dusty and exhausted but triumphant. He went immediately to Judge Harrison with his news, and the judge wasted no time in issuing warrants for the arrests of Victoria Pritchard and Lawrence Carter. Sheriff Thomas, faced with overwhelming evidence of his mistake, had no choice but to execute the warrants, though he did so with ill grace. When Nathan finally made it to the jail to see Penelope, he found her pacing her cell anxiously. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the relief on her face made every difficult moment of the past week worthwhile. "You are back," she said, rushing to the bars. "I was so worried. Clara told me you went to Dodge City, but she did not know when you would return." "I am back, and I have good news," Nathan said, unable to keep the smile from his face. "We found the man Victoria hired to help her. His name is Jake Morrison, and he is willing to testify that she killed her husband and framed you. Judge Harrison has issued warrants for Victoria's arrest. This nightmare is almost over, Penelope." Penelope's hands flew to her mouth, and she made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Truly." "You are certain, completely certain," Nathan assured her. "Morrison will be brought here to testify, and with his statement combined with the letter I found and what I overheard Victoria say, there is no way she can escape justice. You will be exonerated, Penelope. You are going to be free." The tears came then, flowing freely down Penelope's face. Nathan reached through the bars and pulled her as close as he could, wishing desperately that he could hold her properly, without iron bars between them. She pressed her face against the bars and wept, and Nathan held her hands and murmured reassurances until her tears finally subsided. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice hoarse from crying. "Thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me when you had no reason to. You saved my life, Nathan." "You gave me a reason to fight," Nathan replied. "You made me remember what it feels like to stand up for something important, to believe in someone even when the whole world says you are wrong. You saved me too, Penelope, in ways you cannot imagine." Over the next week, events moved swiftly. Victoria Pritchard was arrested and placed in the same jail that had held Penelope, though in a different cell. Lawrence Carter was also arrested as an accessory after the fact. Morrison was brought from Dodge City and gave a full statement to Judge Harrison. A hearing was convened, and this time, the truth finally came out. Morrison testified about Victoria's plan to murder her husband and frame an innocent woman. He described in detail how Victoria had provided him with Penelope's handkerchief and paid him to plant the murder weapon in her room. The letter from Morrison to Victoria was entered as evidence, as was Nathan's testimony about the conversation he had overheard between Victoria and Lawrence Carter. Victoria initially denied everything, but faced with the overwhelming evidence, she finally broke down and confessed. She admitted that she had been the one to shoot her husband in his office, wearing gloves to avoid leaving gunpowder residue on her hands. She had pressed Penelope's handkerchief into Samuel's hand to make it look like there had been a struggle. Morrison had then planted the gun in Penelope's room the following morning, before the sheriff arrived to search it. The confession took place in open court, and Penelope was present to hear it. Nathan sat beside her, holding her hand as the woman who had nearly destroyed her life admitted to her crimes. When it was over, Judge Harrison formally vacated Penelope's conviction and declared her innocent of all charges. "Miss Jensen," the judge said solemnly, "on behalf of this court and the state of Kansas, I apologize for the injustice you have suffered. No words can truly make amends for what you have endured, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us for failing you so terribly." Penelope stood, her legs shaky but her voice clear. "Thank you, Your Honor. I am grateful that the truth has finally come to light." She was released immediately, the shackles removed from her wrists for the last time. Nathan was waiting outside the courthouse, and when Penelope emerged into the bright July sunshine, he opened his arms. She ran to him without hesitation, and he caught her up, lifting her off her feet as he held her close. "You are free," he whispered into her hair. "You are truly free." "Thanks to you," she replied, pulling back just enough to look into his face. "You never gave up on me, even when I had almost given up on myself." Nathan set her down gently but did not let go of her. They stood there on the courthouse steps, heedless of the people passing by, lost in each other's eyes. "I made you a promise," Nathan said softly. "I said that when you were free, I would kiss you properly." Penelope's breath caught and she nodded, unable to speak. Nathan cupped her face in his hands and bent down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. But Penelope did not pull away. Instead, she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. But then Penelope's arms went around Nathan's neck, and his arms tightened around her waist, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and relief and love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Nathan rested his forehead against Penelope's, his eyes closed, savoring the moment. "I love you," he said quietly. "I think I have loved you from the moment you told me you were innocent and I could see the truth in your eyes." "I love you too," Penelope replied. "You are the best man I have ever known, Nathan Sanders. You gave me back my life and my future. I want to spend that future with you if you will have me." "Nothing would make me happier," Nathan said, kissing her again softly. "But first, let us get you out of this town, at least for a while. I think you could use a fresh start, somewhere you are not known as the woman who was falsely convicted." Penelope shook her head. "No, I am not running away. This is my home, such as it is. The people here need to see me free and vindicated. I will not let Victoria Pritchard take anything more from me, not even my place in this community." Nathan smiled, pride and love swelling in his chest. "Then we stay, and we face it together." Over the following weeks, Penelope slowly rebuilt her life. She moved out of her room above the general store and accepted an offer from Clara Morrison to stay at her boarding house while she figured out her next steps. Many people in Abilene, ashamed of how quickly they had believed in her guilt, went out of their way to welcome her back and make amends. Others remained distant, uncomfortable with the reminder of how close they had come to participating in a terrible injustice. Penelope decided she no longer wanted to work at the general store, where the owner had done nothing to support her during her trial. Instead, she began offering her sewing services independently, and soon had more work than she could handle. Women throughout Abilene and the surrounding ranches wanted their dresses, their curtains, their linens done by Penelope Jensen, partly out of guilt but also because she was genuinely skilled with a needle. Nathan courted her properly, as he had promised. He would come into town twice a week, dressed in his best clothes, to take her for walks or to church socials or simply to sit on Clara Morrison's porch and talk for hours. They discovered they had much in common, both being orphaned young, both having experienced false accusations and the pain of being rejected by their communities. But they also had different perspectives and experiences that complemented each other perfectly. One evening in late September, as the Kansas plains were turning gold with autumn, Nathan took Penelope on a buggy ride out to the Triple Creek Ranch where he worked. The ranch was beautiful, with rolling hills and a creek that ran clear and cold through the property. The ranch house was large and well-maintained, home to the Patterson family who owned the spread. "I have been saving my wages for years," Nathan told Penelope as they sat beside the creek, watching the water flow past. "I have almost enough to buy my own piece of land and start my own ranch. It would not be anything grand at first, just a small operation, but it would be mine. Ours if you would consider sharing it with me." Penelope turned to him, her eyes wide. "Nathan, are you asking what I think you are asking?" Nathan took her hand, his expression serious but filled with love. "Penelope Jensen, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who has nothing to offer you but hard work, a modest future, and a love that will never waver? I know I am not wealthy, and I cannot promise you an easy life, but I can promise you that I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy, so different from the tears of despair she had shed in that jail cell just a few months ago. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. You have already given me the most precious gift anyone could give, my freedom and my future. Sharing that future with you would be the greatest blessing I could imagine." Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Penelope felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. After everything she had endured, after coming so close to losing her life for a crime she did not commit, she had found something more valuable than gold: true love and a partner who believed in her absolutely. They were married in November, in the small church in Abilene. Clara Morrison stood up with Penelope, and one of Nathan's fellow ranch hands, a man named Thomas Riley, stood up with Nathan. Judge Harrison presided over the ceremony, having offered his services personally as a way of making amends for the role he had played in Penelope's conviction. The wedding was simple but beautiful. Penelope wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. Nathan wore a new suit, purchased specially for the occasion, and looked so handsome that Penelope could barely tear her eyes away from him during the ceremony. When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, and Nathan kissed his bride, the small crowd of friends and well-wishers erupted in applause. Victoria Pritchard and Lawrence Carter were both in prison, awaiting trial for murder and conspiracy. Jake Morrison had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in the crime, a relatively light sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Justice had finally been served. After the wedding, there was a modest celebration at Clara Morrison's boarding house. People brought food and gifts, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Penelope laughed more than she had in years, swept around the room in Nathan's strong arms, feeling truly happy for the first time since her parents had died. When the evening finally ended and they retired to their room at the boarding house, which would serve as their temporary home until they could move to their own place, Nathan carried Penelope over the threshold. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Mrs. Sanders," he said softly, trying out the name, "my wife, it still does not seem real." "It is real," Penelope assured him, placing her hands over his. "We are real, this love is real, and our future together is real. After everything we have been through, we deserve this happiness." Nathan kissed her softly, then more deeply, and Penelope melted into his embrace. They had waited for this moment, honoring the proprieties despite their deep love, and now they could finally express their feelings fully without reservation or restraint. As winter settled over Kansas, Nathan and Penelope began building their life together. Nathan had indeed saved enough money to purchase a piece of land about 15 miles from Abilene, a beautiful spot with good water and grazing land. It was modest, only 160 acres, but it was theirs, and they poured all their energy and dreams into making it a home. Nathan built them a small house with his own hands, with Penelope helping wherever she could. It had 2 rooms initially, a main living area with a kitchen and fireplace and a bedroom. Nathan promised to add more rooms as they needed them, and Penelope blushed, understanding his meaning. They both wanted children, a family to fill their home with love and laughter. They purchased a small herd of cattle with the last of Nathan's savings, and some money Penelope had saved from her sewing work. Nathan worked dawn to dusk, tending the cattle, mending fences, and building the infrastructure they would need for a successful ranch. Penelope managed their household, continued her sewing work to bring in additional income, and learned the basics of ranch management so she could help Nathan effectively. Life was hard, but it was good. They fell into bed exhausted each night, but they always took time to hold each other close and express their love. Nathan never let a day pass without telling Penelope how much she meant to him, how grateful he was that she had chosen to share her life with him. And Penelope made sure Nathan knew that he was her hero, the man who had saved her life and given her a reason to believe in goodness again. In the spring of 1884, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch of their little house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nathan's face transformed with joy, and he dropped to his knees beside her chair, pressing his face against her still flat belly. "A baby," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Our baby. Penelope, I love you so much. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for giving me a life where I can bring a child into the world without fear," Penelope replied, running her fingers through his hair. "Thank you for being the kind of man I am proud to call the father of my children." Their son was born in December of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's delicate features. They named him Samuel, not after the man whose death had nearly destroyed Penelope's life, but after her father, a good man who had taught her the value of integrity and hard work. Holding her son in her arms, with Nathan beside her looking at their child with awe and love, Penelope reflected on how much her life had changed in the past 2 years. She had gone from the depths of despair, facing a death sentence for a crime she did not commit, to the heights of joy, surrounded by love and holding her newborn child. Nathan seemed to sense her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, careful not to wake the sleeping baby. "I am thinking about how close I came to losing all of this," Penelope said. "If you had not believed in me, if you had not fought for me, I would be dead and Samuel would never have been born. You gave me back my life, Nathan." "You gave me a reason to fight," Nathan replied, kissing her forehead gently. "You taught me what it means to truly believe in someone, to stand up for what is right even when the whole world says you are wrong. We saved each other, Penelope, and we built this beautiful life together." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter named Grace was born in 1886, with Penelope's blonde hair and Nathan's steady temperament. Another son, Matthew, arrived in 1888, completing their family. The ranch prospered, and Nathan's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher spread throughout the county. Penelope continued her sewing, but now she taught her skills to other women, particularly those who had fallen on hard times and needed a way to support themselves. She never forgot what it felt like to be alone and accused, and she made it her mission to help other women who found themselves in difficult circumstances. In 1890, Judge Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, Penelope and Nathan stood together, holding their children, and silently thanked the man who had been willing to admit his mistake and give Penelope a second chance at justice. His integrity had made their happy life possible. Victoria Pritchard died in prison in 1892, her health broken by the harsh conditions and her own guilt. Penelope felt no satisfaction in this news, only sadness that a woman had been so consumed by greed and selfishness that she had been willing to kill and destroy an innocent life to get what she wanted. As Penelope and Nathan grew older, their love only deepened. They faced challenges together: drought years when the cattle struggled, sickness that swept through their family but thankfully did not claim any lives, the normal trials and tribulations of life on a Kansas ranch. But they faced everything as partners, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in November of 1903, Nathan took Penelope back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed all those years ago. Their children were grown now. Samuel was 19 and working the ranch alongside his father. Grace was 17 and engaged to a nice young man from a neighboring ranch. And Matthew was 15 and dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. "You remember this place?" Nathan asked, his hair now streaked with gray but his eyes still as warm and loving as they had been the day they met. "I remember," Penelope said, smiling up at him. "You asked me to marry you right here. You promised me hard work, a modest future, and a love that would never waver." "Have I kept my promises?" Nathan asked. Penelope took his hand and pressed it to her heart. "You have kept every promise and given me more than I ever dreamed possible. You saved my life, Nathan, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You loved me when I was at my lowest point, when I had nothing to offer but my innocence and my hope. That kind of love is rare and precious, and I have treasured it every day of these 20 years. Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close the way he had done thousands of times over the years. "I would do it all again," he said fiercely. "I would fight for you, believe in you, love you through anything. You are my heart, Penelope. You always have been and you always will be." They stood there by the creek as the sun set. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built a life filled with light and love. Penelope thought back to that terrified young woman in a jail cell, facing death for a crime she did not commit, and marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been saved by a cowboy who believed in her innocence when no one else would. He had fought for her, risked his own safety to uncover the truth, and loved her with a devotion that never wavered. And in return, she had given him her whole heart, building a life and a family with him that exceeded their wildest dreams. As they walked back to their ranch house, hand in hand, Penelope sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She had been given a second chance at life, and she had made the most of it. She had known love, both given and received, in its purest form. She had raised children who were kind and strong. She had built a home filled with joy and laughter. The story of her false conviction and Nathan's heroic efforts to prove her innocence had become something of a legend in the area. People spoke of it as an example of the importance of believing in someone's innocence until guilt was proven, of not rushing to judgment based on circumstantial evidence. The tragedy of what had almost happened served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of false accusations and the vital importance of thorough investigations. But for Penelope and Nathan, The story was more personal and more profound. It was the story of how they met, how they fell in love, and how their faith in each other had overcome impossible odds. It was a love story born in the darkest of circumstances, forged in the fire of injustice, and strengthened by years of partnership and devotion. As they reached their house and saw their children waiting on the porch, Penelope squeezed Nathan's hand. He looked down at her and smiled, that same warm smile that had given her hope in her jail cell all those years ago. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "Always and forever." They climbed the porch steps together, moving into the warmth and light of their home, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured. The past, with all its pain and injustice, had shaped them, but it did not define them. What defined them was the choice they had made to believe in each other, to fight for truth, and to build a life based on love and trust. And as they sat down to dinner with their children, sharing stories and laughter around the table Nathan had built with his own hands, Penelope Jensen Sanders knew that she was blessed beyond measure. She had found her happy ending, not in spite of the trials she had faced, but perhaps because of them. Those trials had led her to Nathan, and Nathan had led her to this life, this love, this joy. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, where justice was sometimes hard to find and innocent people could be swept up in terrible circumstances through no fault of their own. But it was also a place where heroes could emerge, where a cowboy with a strong sense of right and wrong could change the course of someone's life, where love could bloom in the most unlikely of circumstances. Penelope had been convicted of a crime she did not commit. Nathan, the believing cowboy, had proved her innocence and loved her with a devotion that never faltered. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting. And when they were old and gray, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they would tell the story of how they met, how they fell in love, and how they overcame impossible odds to build their happily ever after. It was a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, and a life worth living. And as Penelope looked across the dinner table at Nathan, seeing the love in his eyes that had never dimmed, she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of their journey together, because every trial, every hardship, every dark moment had led them to this place of light and love and family. They had found their happy ending, and it was everything she had ever dreamed of and more.